Well, the U.S. is definitely feeling the effects of that ban. Joe Pickard, chief economist at the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries, joins me now to chat more about this development. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks for having me.
So we see that China is clearly making the environment a top priority. So what are the implications of this ban for the recycling industry within China as well as globally?
Well, quite significant, right? Because China is the world's largest importer of recyclables. And I think it's important to make the distinction between recyclables, such as scrap, versus waste and garbage. Waste, by its definition, has no value. Scrap recyclables, on the other hand, are extremely important raw material inputs for the manufacturing process. Here in the United States, for example, about 60% or more of all the steel produced in the United States comes from scrap. So that's an important distinction to begin with. Because China is such a huge player in the global marketplace, and because the United States is the world's largest exporter of recyclables, it has outside implications for our industry.
So then specifically as we look at waste plastic, how far do you think that this ban will go when it comes to educating consumers about it?
Well, I think the ban is really intended to improve environmental quality within China. That's the primary driver, I think. And there are good reasons for that. China really has been the largest importer of scrap recyclables, but there also have been concerns that some of the material has not been of a sufficiently high quality, that what they're importing, and also that the material is not being handled necessarily in the most environmentally friendly ways. So I think the environmental concerns are the main driver here, and I think to the extent that it improves the quality of material that's being shipped around the world, that it spurs investment in technology to make cleaner products, those are going to be extremely positive developments. But in the short term, I think plastics consumption is still going to come from either one of two sources. It's going to come from primary resin production, or it's going to come from scrap recyclables.
So then in terms of some examples of countries that are doing a good job dealing with their waste and their plastics, who would you say are the real standouts?
I would say here in the United States, we do an excellent job. Certainly in Western Europe, they do an excellent job dealing with their plastic scrap. But certainly there's room for improvement globally, and I think that's why you're going to see increased investment in the recycling technology space.
Because we have seen some backups when it came to plastic waste. Britain, Germany, Japan. We know that Japan and the United States accounts for roughly 10% of the volume each from the 7.3 tons of waste plastics last year. So what are some of the solutions that they're coming up with so far?
Well, and you're exactly right. And the big concern on that score is that because China is such a big player in the global marketplace, if they stop taking in these recyclables, that's really going to have a depressing impact on the recyclables market, which would then push down the prices of these commodities sufficiently low that it might actually discourage recycling. And that's the last thing that we want to do. You don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Recycling certainly is a part of our environmental solutions, but it just needs to be done in a sustainable way. So I think from the U.S. perspective, certainly they're going to be looking at developing other markets overseas, but China is a very difficult market to replace.
Now, could China's ban potentially have any unintended consequences? For example, perhaps illegal dumping or people perhaps using incineration or some more irresponsible ways to deal with their plastics and waste?
And that's the major concern, especially for plastics, for paper, and for some other commodities that are relatively low per unit commodity items. Plastic scrap can be in the cents per pound, so it's relatively low valued commodities as compared to other scrap recyclables. And again, if there's a sufficient decline in global demand for those commodities, prices are going to come down, as we've already seen, and that disincentivizes the recycling process. And here in the United States, we've seen some municipalities already determining that because of transportation costs and not having sufficient end markets for those recyclables, they're going to stop collecting that material.
And what about the companies who export this waste and these plastic manufacturers? Is this a wake-up call for them? How are they reacting?
Absolutely a wake-up call for them. Again, because China is just such a huge player in the market. Again, annually importing between 7 and 8 million tons of plastic scrap alone. In terms of the U.S. dependence on exports to China, on recyclables alone across all scrap commodities, we shipped about $5 billion worth of commodities to China just in 2016. So it's hard to overestimate just how important China is. Developing other markets, investing in technology here in the United States, those could all be positive developments going forward.
And very quickly, we know that there are several steps in the chain, from the manufacturers to the consumers to eventually how they end up treating these products. What should the focus be on? If you had one place where you could perhaps start in really stemming stemming how this is handled, where would you start?
I think one of the best places to start, and you're right, it's an entire chain of recycling, and all of us have a part to play. One of the most important parts is on the collection side, to make sure that recyclables are properly sorted and separated to maintain a high quality stream of recyclables.
All right, well, thank you so much. Hopefully people heed your warning there.
Thank
Joe
you.
Pickard, Chief Economist at the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries.